Let's talk about the year 2025. What a year. It was just packed with these huge contradictions, right? On one hand, you had wars escalating and economies that felt like they were constantly on the brink. But at the exact same time, humanity was making these absolutely staggering leaps forward in science and tech. It was a year that totally reshaped our world. And honestly, we're still trying to figure out what it all means. So that brings us to the big question, doesn't it? Was 2025 a year where everything just started to unravel, or was it actually a year of incredible reinvention? That's the core idea we're going to dig into today.
Okay, so to really get a handle on 2025, we've got to start with the geopolitical landscape. And to put it mildly, the world was on edge. You know those tensions that have been simmering for years? Well, they finally boiled over. And it created this feeling of instability just everywhere.
And you saw this reflected in the headlines, which were dominated by major conflicts. In Europe, the war in Ukraine just kept putting this immense pressure on the whole continent. Then the Middle East was shaken by a direct clash between Israel and Iran. And over in Africa, the civil war in Sudan was this really stark reminder of the devastating human cost, happening outside of those big power struggles.
But it wasn't just about the active conflicts. The tensions in 2025 went way deeper than that. We're talking about the very foundations of international leadership starting to shift, which created this brand new, really uncertain global landscape.
For example, in the United States, you had the return of a Trump presidency, which right away signaled a big shift in things like trade policy and long-standing alliances. At the same time, a pretty historic moment was unfolding with the election of a new pontiff, Pope Leo XIV, who added a really powerful new voice to global affairs. So you can imagine, at these critical summits, like NATO in The Hague or the G20 in Johannesburg, world leaders were really grappling with all these new dynamics, just trying to figure out the rules for this rapidly changing world.
Now, this global friction wasn't just political, not by a long shot. It spilled right over into the economic arena. A totally new kind of battleground emerged, one that wasn't fought with armies, but with tariffs and technology. It was a fierce fight for resources and, ultimately, for dominance.
So, if you looked at the big picture, global growth had slowed down, but it was still positive. But that wasn't the real story. The real story, the one that you and I felt, the one that impacted industries everywhere, was the massive disruption to supply chains. A whole new wave of tariffs fundamentally rewired the flow of trade, and that created a whole new set of winners and losers in the global economy.
And right at the heart of this new economic battleground was one single resource: semiconductor chips. Think about it. These tiny electronic brains power literally everything, from the phone in your pocket to our most advanced defense systems. In 2025, they basically became the world's most strategic asset, and the competition to control them, it was absolutely fierce.
And in this race for chip dominance, there were some very clear frontrunners. You had Asia and America really solidifying their lead, just pouring massive investments into production. Europe, on the other hand, was really struggling to keep pace, and this created a pretty significant strategic vulnerability for them in this new global economy.
Okay, but here's where the story of 2025 takes this wild, dramatic turn. Because while all this was happening, nations clashing, economies competing, humanity was, at the exact same time, going through one of the biggest technological leaps in our history. Right in the middle of all that chaos, we were literally inventing the future.
Get this, over 100. That's the number of countries that sent representatives to the Paris AI Action Summit. Just think about that for a second. It's such a powerful number, and it really shows you just how central the conversation around AI had become for the entire planet.
And believe me, this wasn't just talk. 2025 was the year AI jumped from the tech blogs to the front page of every newspaper. It was being integrated into healthcare to help with diagnostics, deployed in our schools, and even adopted for national defense. And that's exactly why that summit in Paris was so incredibly urgent.
And it wasn't just AI. We were also pushing the boundaries of space exploration in a huge way. SpaceX's Starship had a complete, successful test flight, and this was a massive multi-stage triumph. We're talking a successful launch, achieving orbit, and, this is the big one, paving the way for a whole new generation of commercial missions to the moon. And the innovation just kept coming. 2025 also saw these major breakthroughs in nanotechnology, new security protocols using the totally mind-bending power of quantum computing. We're talking about creating basically unhackable networks, incredible innovations in medical robotics for surgery, and even early experiments in creating artificial solar eclipses to study energy. What a remarkable period of invention, right?
So, okay, we've got all these huge grand themes: conflict, economics, technology. But what was it actually like for people in 2025? Well, that brings us to this constant push and pull, this battle for our planet and for ourselves. A fight that was happening on a global scale, but also on a really personal one.
And you could see this dual reality so clearly when you looked at our planet. On one side, you had a world under just immense pressure from climate change. We're talking extreme droughts, devastating floods. But on the other side, you had a world that was fighting back with this incredible, unprecedented cooperation. We saw record investment in renewables and even a landmark global ocean treaty.
And that fight back wasn't just environmental either. There were some really inspiring signs of human progress. Life-saving medical breakthroughs were offering new hope. Scientists were figuring out how to preserve endangered species through genetic recovery. And we saw this huge cultural shift, where things like digital mental health support and sustainable living went from being niche ideas to being totally mainstream.
You know, there's a quote from a global review of that year that just says it all: tension and unity, fear and invention. That's what 2025 was. It was defined by these contradictions. Humanity was just balanced on a knife's edge, caught right between incredible risk and even greater possibility.
So all of this leaves us with one last big question. Was 2025 the end of an old world, or was it the chaotic, tense, and incredibly inventive start of a new one? It was a year that will absolutely shape the decade to come, forcing all of us to confront the future we're building, for better or for worse.